Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her palms as she approached the shooting range entrance. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete building, and she could already hear the sharp crack of gunfire echoing from within. At 19, she had never held a real firearm, but something deep inside her had always been drawn to precision sports. Her father, a former military man, had taught her to throw darts with deadly accuracy as a child. Her friends often joked that she could hit a fly with a paper airplane from across the room. The Riverside Shooting Club had been a male-dominated fortress for over 60 years. Founded in 1963 by a group of World War II veterans, it had grown into one of the most prestigious marksmanship facilities in the state. The walls were lined with photographs of champions, all men, their stern faces staring down at anyone who entered. The trophy cases gleamed with golden cups and silver medals, each one earned by steady hands and keen eyes that belonged to the club's male members. Sarah's introduction to this world came through her college roommate, Jenny, whose father was a longtime member. Jenny had mentioned the club during one of their late-night conversations about future careers. Sarah was studying mechanical engineering, but she felt something was missing from her life. She craved a challenge that would test not just her mind, but her physical precision and mental focus. When Sarah first walked into the club that Tuesday morning, conversation stopped. The dozen men scattered around the facility turned to look at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed skepticism. She wore simple jeans and a plain white t-shirt, her long black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. In her hand, she carried a small notebook where she had written down everything she could find about competitive shooting techniques. Frank Morrison, the club's head instructor, was a 62-year-old man with calloused hands and sharp gray eyes. He had been teaching marksmanship for over 3 decades and had trained some of the state's best shooters. When Jenny's father introduced Sarah to Frank, the older man's expression was polite but doubtful. He had seen plenty of people come through those doors thinking shooting was easy, only to discover the intense mental discipline it required. "So you want to learn to shoot?" Frank said, looking Sarah up and down. "Have you ever handled a firearm before?" Sarah shook her head honestly. "No, sir, but I'm willing to learn. I've always been good with precision activities. I can show you if you'd like." Frank almost smiled at her earnestness. He handed her an unloaded pistol, watching carefully as she examined it. Sarah's hands were steady, and she handled the weapon with respect rather than fear. She asked intelligent questions about the grip, the sight alignment, and the trigger mechanism. Her engineering background helped her understand the mechanical aspects quickly. For the next 2 hours, Frank taught Sarah the basics of firearm safety, proper stance, and breathing techniques. Other members of the club watched from a distance, some making quiet comments among themselves. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, but she focused entirely on Frank's instructions. When he finally allowed her to fire her first shots at a paper target, something clicked. The first shot went wide, missing the target completely. Sarah frowned, analyzing what had gone wrong. The second shot hit the outer ring. By her 5th shot, she was consistently hitting the target. Frank raised his eyebrows, but said nothing. After 30 rounds, Sarah had managed to group her shots in a pattern that impressed even the veteran instructor. "Not bad for a first-timer," Frank admitted grudgingly. "But hitting a stationary target at close range is just the beginning. Real marksmanship takes years to develop." Sarah nodded, her eyes bright with excitement. "When can I come back?" That question surprised Frank. Most beginners left after their first session, either discouraged by their poor performance or overwhelmed by the complexity of the sport. But Sarah seemed energized by the challenge. She had filled several pages in her notebook with observations and questions. Over the following weeks, Sarah returned to the club 3 times a week. She arrived early and stayed late, practicing until her shoulders ached from holding the pistol steady. Frank began to notice that she absorbed instruction faster than any student he had ever taught. She never made the same mistake twice, and she approached each session with scientific precision. The other members gradually grew accustomed to her presence. Some remained skeptical, making comments about how women lack the upper body strength for serious competition shooting. Others were more welcoming, offering tips and encouragement. But Sarah remained focused on her training, treating everyone with respectful politeness while keeping her attention on improving her skills. One afternoon, during her 6th week at the club, Sarah overheard a conversation that would change everything. Two of the club's top competitors, Mike Stevens and Robert Shun, were discussing the upcoming state championship. They were worried about their chances against the defending champion from the Eastern District Shooting Club. Johnson has been unbeatable for 3 years straight, Mike was saying. His precision is just incredible. I don't think anyone in our club can match him. Sarah quietly continued her practice, but her ears perked up when she heard Frank join the conversation. Maybe it's time we tried a different approach, Frank said thoughtfully. Johnson expects to face the same type of competitors he always does. Big men with powerful grips and traditional techniques. What if we surprised him? What do you mean? Robert asked. Frank glanced towards Sarah, who was concentrating on her target with laser focus. I mean, what if our secret weapon isn't what anyone expects? That evening, Frank approached Sarah as she was cleaning her equipment. How would you feel about entering a competition? He asked casually. Sarah looked up in surprise. I've only been shooting for 6 weeks, Mr. Morrison. I don't think I'm ready for competition-level shooting. The monthly club tournament is next Saturday, Frank continued. It's small scale, just our members. Good practice for bigger competitions down the road. What do you say? Sarah felt her heart race. The idea both terrified and thrilled her. She knew the other members would be watching her closely, probably expecting her to fail. But she also knew she had been improving rapidly. Her groupings were getting tighter, and her confidence was growing. Okay, she said quietly. I'll do it. Frank smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. Good. But I'm going to train you harder than ever this week. If you're going to represent yourself in that tournament, you're going to be prepared. The week that followed was intense. Frank put Sarah through drills she had never experienced before. He taught her to shoot from different positions, under time pressure, and with various types of ammunition. He worked on her mental game, teaching her visualization techniques and stress management. Sarah's notebook grew thick with technical notes and training observations. As Saturday approached, word spread through the club that the new girl was entering the tournament. Some members were supportive, while others made it clear they thought she was being foolish. Sarah heard the whispered conversations and saw the skeptical looks, but she used them as motivation. Every doubt from others became fuel for her determination. The night before the tournament, Sarah barely slept. She reviewed her notes, practiced her breathing exercises, and visualized herself shooting perfect scores. She had no illusions about winning. There would be men competing who had decades of experience. But she was determined to prove that she belonged there. When Saturday morning arrived, Sarah walked into the shooting club with her head held high. She wore her lucky earrings, small silver targets her grandmother had given her, and carried her equipment bag with steady hands. The tournament was about to begin, and she was ready to show everyone what she had learned. Frank met her at the registration table with an encouraging nod. Remember everything we practiced, he said quietly, and don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong here. You've earned your place. Sarah signed her name on the competitor list, her signature clear and confident. Around her, 23 men were making their final preparations. None of them knew that they were about to witness the beginning of something extraordinary. The quiet girl who had walked into their club just 6 weeks earlier was about to start a revolution that would change competitive shooting forever. The tournament began at 8 o'clock sharp on a crisp Saturday morning. 24 competitors lined up at the firing line, their equipment gleaming under the fluorescent lights of the indoor range. Sarah found herself assigned to lane 15, between two club veterans who had been competing for over a decade. Tom Bradley, an insurance salesman with thick glasses, nodded politely at her from lane 14. Jim Watson, a retired police officer with massive hands, barely acknowledged her presence in lane 16. The first stage was precision shooting at 25 yards. Each competitor would fire 20 rounds at paper targets, with scores calculated based on accuracy and grouping. Sarah had practiced this exact scenario dozens of times over the past week, but the tournament atmosphere felt completely different. The range was packed with spectators, mostly club members, and their families who had come to watch the monthly competition. Sarah could feel eyes on her as she unpacked her equipment. She moved with deliberate calm, following the same routine Frank had taught her. Check the pistol, verify it was unloaded, set up her shooting bag, arrange her ammunition in neat rows. Her hands were steady, but she could feel her heart beating faster than normal. "First time competing?" Tom Bradley asked quietly, adjusting his own equipment. Sarah nodded. "Yes, sir. I'm pretty nervous." Tom smiled kindly. "That's normal. The nerves usually help if you channel them right. Just focus on your fundamentals and forget about everyone else." The range officer called for the first relay to prepare. Sarah was in the second group, so she had time to watch the first 12 competitors shoot. She studied their techniques, noting the small differences in stance and grip. Most of the men favored a two-handed isosceles stance, but a few used the weaver position that Frank had taught her. When her relay was called to the line, Sarah walked forward with measured steps. She set her target at exactly 25 yards, verified the distance with the provided measuring tape, and returned to her firing position. The range officer gave the commands in a loud, clear voice that echoed through the facility. "Relay 2, you have 20 minutes for 20 rounds, precision fire. Load and make ready." Sarah loaded her first magazine with steady hands. The familiar weight of the pistol felt reassuring. She had fired thousands of practice rounds over the past 6 weeks, and the movements were becoming automatic. She raised the gun, found her sight alignment, and waited for the command to commence firing. "Relay 2, you may commence firing when ready." The range erupted with the controlled chaos of competition shooting. Sarah blocked out the sound of other firearms and focused entirely on her target. She took a deep breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger with steady pressure. The shot broke clean, and she saw the bullet hole appear in the 8 ring of her target. "Good start," she thought to herself. She reset her position, found her sight picture again, and fired her second shot. This one hit the 9 ring, closer to the center. With each shot, Sarah felt her confidence growing. The nervousness began to fade, replaced by the focused concentration that Frank had helped her develop. By her 10th shot, Sarah had found her rhythm. She was shooting methodically, taking her time between shots to ensure proper sight alignment and breathing. Her grouping was tight, with most shots landing in the 8 and 9 rings. She could sense that the competitors on either side of her were shooting faster, but she stuck to her own pace. Tom Bradley finished his string first, firing all 20 shots in just 12 minutes. Jim Watson was done 2 minutes later. Sarah continued her deliberate approach, not rushing despite the fact that she was one of the last shooters still firing. When she squeezed off her 20th and final shot, she felt satisfied with her performance, even though she had no idea how her score compared to the others. The ceasefire command echoed through the range, and all weapons were cleared and holstered. The targets were collected for scoring, and competitors gathered around the results table to wait for their results. Sarah found herself standing slightly apart from the groups of men who were discussing their shots and comparing notes. Frank approached her with a neutral expression. "How did it feel?" he asked. "Good, I think," Sarah replied. "I stayed focused on my fundamentals like you taught me. The grouping felt tight, but I won't know until we see the scores." 20 minutes later, the range officer called everyone together to announce the results. Sarah's stomach churned as he began reading the scores in reverse order, starting with the lowest. When he reached the top 5, Sarah's name still hadn't been called. 5th place, with a score of 168 out of 200, Tom Bradley. Tom smiled and accepted polite applause from the group. Sarah realized that her score had to be either very good or very bad if her name hadn't been called yet. 4th place, score of 172, Jim Watson. Jim nodded acknowledgement but looked disappointed. He had clearly expected to place higher. 3rd place, score of 176, Mike Stevens. Mike was one of the club's top shooters, and his third-place finish seemed to surprise everyone, including himself. Second place, with a score of 181, Robert Chun. Robert had won this tournament twice before, so his second-place finish was respectable, but not unexpected. Sarah began to realize that the scores were very high this month, which meant her own performance was probably not as good as she had hoped. And, in first place, the range officer announced, with a score of 187 out of 200, shooting her first competition ever, Sarah Martinez. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah felt her legs go weak as the words sank in. She had not only placed well, she had won the entire tournament. The men around her looked shocked, and she could see expressions ranging from amazement to disbelief. Frank was the first to react, clapping his hands slowly. Outstanding shooting, Sarah. That's the highest score we've seen in this tournament in over 2 years. Gradually, the other competitors began to applaud. Tom Bradley was the first to approach her, extending his hand with a genuine smile. Incredible shooting, he said warmly. You kept your composure like a veteran out there. But not everyone was pleased with the result. Sarah could see several men standing in small groups, speaking in low voices and glancing in her direction. She caught fragments of their conversations, comments about beginner's luck, questions about whether she had received special coaching, and suggestions that the scoring might have been incorrect. Jim Watson approached the scoring table and asked to review Sarah's target personally. The range officer handed it to him, and he studied it carefully under the light. The 20 bullet holes were clustered in a tight group, with 17 shots in the 8, 9, and 10 rings. 3 shots had strayed to the 7 ring, but the overall pattern was undeniably impressive. This is accurate scoring, Jim announced reluctantly. She shot a clean, honest target. The trophy presentation was awkward. Sarah accepted the small bronze cup with grace, thanking the club and her instructor for their support. She could feel the tension in the room and knew that her victory had created mixed emotions among the membership. Some seemed genuinely impressed, while others appeared skeptical or even resentful. After the ceremony, Sarah packed her equipment quickly, wanting to escape the uncomfortable atmosphere. Frank walked her to the parking lot, carrying her trophy and target. You know this changes everything, he said once they were outside. You can't just be another student anymore. That was championship-level shooting for someone with your experience. Sarah looked down at the trophy in her hands. It was small and simple, but it represented something much larger. What do you mean? Frank leaned against her car, his expression serious. I mean, there's a state championship in 3 months. The club can send 3 representatives. After today's performance, you've earned consideration for one of those spots. The idea seemed impossible to Sarah. 3 months ago, she had never held a firearm. Now, her instructor was talking about state-level competition against seasoned marksmen from across the region. Do you really think I'm ready for something like that? She asked. Frank was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. I think you have natural talent that I've never seen before. But talent alone won't be enough at the state level. The competition will be fierce, and you'll be facing shooters who have been training for decades. Sarah felt a familiar fire kindle her chest, the same determination that had driven her to master dart throwing as a child and excel in her engineering studies. What would I need to do to prepare? Train harder than you've ever trained for anything in your life, Frank replied. 6 days a week, different disciplines, mental conditioning, equipment upgrades. It would consume your life for the next 3 months. Sarah looked back at the shooting club building, where she could see several members still discussing her unexpected victory through the windows. She knew that if she pursued this path, she would face doubt, skepticism, and possibly hostility from people who didn't believe she belonged in their sport. When do we start? She asked. Frank smiled, the same genuine expression she had seen when he first invited her to compete. Monday morning, 6 a.m. And Sarah, he added as she got in her car, forget about proving anything to anyone else. From now on, you're only competing against yourself. As Sarah drove home with her first shooting trophy on the passenger seat, she had no idea that news of her victory was already spreading beyond the Riverside Shooting Club. Robert Chun had posted about the tournament results on the State Shooting Association's online forum, and her story was beginning to attract attention from competitors and officials throughout the region. The comfortable anonymity of being a beginner was over. Sarah Martinez had announced herself to the shooting world, and the shooting world was definitely taking notice. The alarm rang at 5:30 every morning, and Sarah was always awake before it sounded. 3 weeks had passed since her tournament victory, and her life had completely changed. She ate breakfast in the dark, drove to the range before sunrise, and spent 2 hours each morning working with Frank before most people were even thinking about getting out of bed. Frank had not been exaggerating when he warned her about the intensity of championship preparation. The casual 3 times-a-week schedule was replaced with a demanding routine that tested every aspect of her physical and mental abilities. Mondays and Wednesdays were precision shooting days, focusing on accuracy at varying distances. Tuesdays and Thursdays covered rapid-fire competitions, where speed and accuracy had to be balanced perfectly. Fridays were dedicated to mental training and equipment testing. Saturdays meant traveling to other ranges to experience different environments and conditions. The transformation in Sarah's shooting was remarkable. Frank introduced her to advanced techniques that most recreational shooters never learned. She mastered the art of calling her shots, predicting exactly where each bullet would hit based on her sight picture and trigger control. Her natural ability to analyze and adjust made her improvement rapid and consistent. Your engineering background is a huge advantage, Frank explained one morning as they reviewed her practice scores. Most shooters develop habits based on feel and intuition. You approach every shot like a mathematical equation, and that precision is showing in your results. The equipment upgrades Frank had mentioned proved essential. Sarah's basic pistol was replaced with a custom-built competition gun that cost more than her car. The trigger was adjusted to break at exactly 2.5 pounds, and the grips were molded specifically for her hands. Frank helped her select specialized shooting glasses that enhanced her vision, and they experimented with different types of ammunition to find the most accurate combination. But the physical improvements were only part of the preparation. Frank introduced Sarah to sports psychology techniques that were used by Olympic athletes. She learned visualization exercises where she would mentally rehearse perfect shooting sequences hundreds of times before actually firing a shot. Breathing and relaxation techniques helped her control her heart rate and maintain steady hands even under pressure. The mental aspect proved to be Sarah's biggest challenge. Unlike her club tournament, where she had been relaxed because no one expected anything from her, the state championship would come with enormous pressure. Frank brought in a sports psychologist named Dr. Rebecca Walsh, who specialized in working with precision athletes. Pressure is just attention focused in the wrong direction, Dr. Walsh explained during one of their sessions. Instead of thinking about what might go wrong or what others expect, you need to channel all that mental energy into executing your technique perfectly. Dr. Walsh taught Sarah meditation techniques and worked with her to develop pre-shot routines that would be exactly the same whether she was practicing alone or competing for a championship. They practiced scenarios where Sarah had to shoot while Frank deliberately tried to distract her with noise, conversation, and movement around her position. As word of Sarah's rapid improvement spread through the shooting community, visitors began appearing at the Riverside Shooting Club. Coaches from other clubs came to observe her training sessions, trying to understand what made this newcomer so successful. Some offered friendly advice and encouragement, while others watched with skeptical expressions, clearly hoping to spot some flaw in her technique. The attention made Sarah uncomfortable, but Frank used it as another training tool. You need to get used to shooting with people watching, he told her. At the state championship, there will be spectators, officials, and other competitors all focusing on your performance. If you can't handle it here, you won't be able to handle it there. 6 weeks into her intensive training, Sarah faced her first real test. The regional qualifying tournament was held at a range 2 hours away, with 60 of the state's top shooters competing for 30 spots in the championship. Sarah would be shooting against men and women who had been competing at high levels for years, many of whom had never heard of her until recently. The drive to the tournament felt different than her trip to the club competition. Sarah's parents came with her for the first time, having finally understood that their daughter's new hobby had become something much more serious. Her father, despite his military background, had never been a competitive shooter, and he was amazed by the level of technical precision required for championship marksmanship. When they arrived at the East Side Shooting Complex, Sarah was struck by the scale of the event. The parking lot was filled with cars from dozens of different shooting clubs, their bumper stickers advertising various gun manufacturers and shooting organizations. Inside the facility, the atmosphere was businesslike and intense. Competitors moved with purposeful efficiency, checking and rechecking their equipment. Frank had prepared Sarah for this moment by describing what she would see and feel. The registration process, the competitor briefing, the practice session, everything proceeded exactly as he had predicted. But knowing what to expect didn't eliminate the butterflies in Sarah's stomach as she realized she was about to compete against some of the best shooters in the region. During the practice session, Sarah noticed other competitors watching her technique. A few approached to introduce themselves, and she was surprised by how welcoming most of them were. Janet Morrison, a 3-time state champion from the Northern District, offered some advice about dealing with the different lighting conditions at this range. "Frank Morrison is your coach, right?" Janet asked. "He called me last week to ask about the setup here. You're lucky to have him. He's trained more champions than anyone else in the state." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward Frank, knowing he was doing everything possible to prepare her for success. But she also felt the weight of responsibility. Frank's reputation was now tied to her performance, and she didn't want to let him down. The tournament format was more complex than anything Sarah had experienced. 3 different shooting disciplines would be contested, with scores combined to determine overall winners. Precision shooting at 50 yards, rapid fire at 25 yards, and a practical shooting course that required competitors to engage multiple targets while moving between positions. Sarah's first event was precision shooting, the discipline where she felt most confident. As she took her position on the firing line, she could see Frank in the spectator area, his expression calm and encouraging. She followed her pre-shot routine exactly as they had practiced hundreds of times. Check equipment, assume shooting stance, control breathing, find sight alignment, execute smooth trigger press. Her first shot hit the 10 ring, drawing a small nod of approval from the competitor shooting beside her. Sarah smiled slightly and settled into her rhythm. Shot after shot landed in the center of the target, her grouping tight and consistent. When she finished the string, she felt confident about her performance, but had no way to know how she compared to the other 59 competitors. The rapid-fire event was more challenging. Sarah had to engage 5 targets in 10 seconds, requiring her to transition quickly between different aiming points while maintaining accuracy. This was Frank's specialty as a coach, and his training paid off. Sarah's transitions were smooth and efficient, her shots finding their marks even under the pressure of the time limit. The practical shooting course was Sarah's weakest discipline, simply because she had the least experience with it. The course required competitors to move through a series of stations, engaging targets from different positions and distances. Some targets were partially hidden behind barriers, requiring precise shot placement to score hits. Sarah approached this challenge with the same methodical mindset she applied to her engineering studies. She walked through the course during the preparation time, calculating the most efficient path and identifying the best shooting positions for each target. When her turn came, she moved with deliberate precision rather than rushing, focusing on making every shot count. As the tournament concluded and scores were calculated, Sarah found herself surrounded by competitors and spectators who wanted to congratulate her on her performance. She had qualified for the state championship with the 7th highest overall score, an achievement that stunned even Frank. 7th place at regionals, in your first major tournament, he said as they loaded her equipment. "Sarah, do you understand what you just accomplished?" Sarah shook her head, still processing the events of the day. I know it's good, but I don't really understand what it means yet. Frank was quiet for a moment, then spoke with unusual emotion in his voice. It means you're not just talented. It means you might be special. Really special. The drive home was filled with excited conversation about the state championship, which was now just 5 weeks away. Sarah's parents, who had watched her compete with growing amazement throughout the day, finally understood that their daughter had found something extraordinary. But Sarah's thoughts were already turning toward the challenges ahead. She had proven she could compete with experienced shooters, but the state championship would bring together only the very best marksmen from across the region. She would need to elevate her performance to an even higher level. As they pulled into the driveway of her family home, Sarah was already planning her training schedule for the following week. The qualification tournament had given her confidence, but it had also shown her areas where improvement was needed. The practical shooting course, in particular, would require significant work. Frank promised to arrange additional training opportunities at other ranges, exposing Sarah to different environments and challenges. He also planned to bring in guest instructors who specialized in the disciplines where Sarah needed the most improvement. 5 weeks, Frank said as he helped carry her gear into the house. 5 weeks to prepare for the biggest shooting competition in the state. Are you ready? Sarah looked at her regional qualifier certificate, already imagining how it would feel to stand on the firing line at the state championship. The girl who had nervously entered the Riverside Shooting Club just 4 months earlier was gone, replaced by a determined competitor who was ready to take on the best shooters in the state. I'm ready, she said simply, and meant every word. The state championship was held at the prestigious Metropolitan Shooting Center, a facility that had hosted national competitions for over 20 years. As Sarah drove through the gates on the morning of registration, she was awed by the scale of the complex. Multiple indoor and outdoor ranges stretched across 40 acres, with professional timing systems, electronic scoring equipment, and spectator galleries that could seat hundreds of people. 120 competitors had qualified from regional tournaments across the state, representing the absolute elite of competitive marksmanship. Sarah recognized several names from shooting magazines and websites, men and women who had won national titles and set records that had stood for years. The defending state champion, Marcus Johnson from the Eastern District, had won the title 4 consecutive times and was considered nearly unbeatable. Frank had arrived 2 days early to scout the facility and understand the specific conditions Sarah would face. He met her at registration with a thick folder of notes about wind patterns, lighting conditions, and the unique challenges of each stage in the competition. His preparation was meticulous, covering every detail that could possibly affect her performance. The 50-yard precision stage will be held on Outdoor Range 3, Frank explained as they walked through the facility. There's a crosswind that picks up around 10 a.m., so you'll need to adjust your point of aim accordingly. The rapid-fire stage uses electronic targets that are more sensitive than what you're used to, and the practical course has 2 positions that are particularly challenging. Sarah absorbed every piece of information, adding to her own notes that had grown into a comprehensive competition manual over the past 5 weeks. Her final preparation period had been intense, with training sessions at 6 different ranges to experience various conditions and challenges. Frank had even arranged for her to practice at a facility that used the same electronic scoring system as the championship. The night before competition began, Sarah attended the mandatory competitors meeting in the center's main conference room. Seeing all 120 qualified shooters in one place was intimidating. These were serious athletes who had dedicated years to perfecting their craft, and many had invested thousands of dollars in specialized equipment and coaching. Sarah found herself seated between Elena Rodriguez, a veteran competitor who had placed in the top 5 times, and David Park, a young shooter who had set a junior record the previous year. Both were friendly and welcoming, offering advice about managing competition nerves and staying focused during the 3-day event. First state championship, Elena asked, and Sarah nodded. The key is treating it like any other tournament. Don't let the atmosphere change your routine or make you try too hard. Shoot your own game, and Let the scores take care of themselves. David agreed enthusiastically. The biggest mistake I made in my first major competition was overthinking everything. Trust your training and stay relaxed. You qualified for a reason. As the meeting concluded and competitors began filing out to prepare for the next day, Sarah noticed several people pointing her out to others. Her rapid rise through the ranks had made her something of a curiosity in the shooting community. Some viewed her as an inspiring newcomer, while others questioned whether her early success was sustainable against the highest level of competition. Championship day dawned clear and cold, with light winds that would favor precision shooting. Sarah arrived at the range 2 hours before her first event, following the same preparation routine she had used at every major tournament. She checked her equipment methodically, verified her ammunition, and spent 30 minutes in mental preparation with the visualization techniques Dr. Walsh had taught her. The first day featured the 50-yard precision event, widely considered the most demanding test of pure marksmanship skill. Competitors would fire 30 shots at targets that required absolute accuracy, with no margin for error. Sarah was assigned to the second relay, giving her the opportunity to observe the first group of shooters and assess the conditions. Marcus Johnson was in the first relay, and Sarah watched him shoot with fascination. His technique was flawless, each shot executed with mechanical precision. His groupings were incredibly tight, and he showed no visible reaction to pressure or distractions. After completing his 30 shots, he received a standing ovation from the spectator gallery, a rare display of emotion at such a formal competition. When Sarah's relay was called to the line, she felt her heart rate increase slightly. Frank had positioned himself in the coaching area where she could see him, and he gave her a subtle thumbs up as she took her firing position. Sarah went through her pre-shot routine, blocking out the sounds of spectators and other competitors around her. Her first shot was a 10, hitting the center ring precisely. Sarah allowed herself a small smile and settled into her rhythm. The engineering mindset that Frank had encouraged served her well, as she approached each shot like a separate problem to be solved rather than getting caught up in cumulative score pressure. By her 15th shot, Sarah realized she was shooting better than she ever had before. Her grouping was incredibly tight, with shots clustered in the center of the target. She could sense excitement building among the spectators who had gathered to watch her relay, but she forced herself to maintain focus on her technique. The final shot broke clean, and Sarah knew immediately that it was a good one. When she lowered her pistol and stepped back from the firing line, the crowd erupted in applause. Frank was smiling broadly from the coaching area, and even some of the other competitors nodded their approval. The scoring took 20 minutes, during which Sarah tried to stay relaxed and avoid speculation about her results. Elena Rodriguez approached her with congratulations, having watched the final portion of Sarah's string. "That was exceptional shooting," Elena said warmly. "I've been competing for 15 years, and I've rarely seen precision like that from anyone, let alone someone in their first state championship." When scores were posted, Sarah had fired a 297 out of 300, tying the women's state record and finishing second overall behind only Marcus Johnson's perfect 300. The shooting community was buzzing with excitement about the unknown competitor who had announced herself on the biggest stage. Frank was almost speechless as they reviewed her target. 29 shots were clustered in the 10 and 9 rings, with only one shot straying to the 8 ring. "Sarah," he said quietly, "this is championship caliber shooting. You've just served notice that you're here to compete for the title." Day 2 brought the rapid fire competition, an event that had traditionally favored male competitors due to the upper body strength required for quick target transitions. Sarah had worked extensively on this discipline, but she knew it remained her biggest challenge against experienced competitors. The format required shooters to engage 5 targets in quick succession, with multiple strings testing both speed and accuracy. Sarah's engineering approach proved valuable again, as she had calculated the most efficient movement patterns and practiced them until they became automatic. Her first string was clean, with all 5 shots hitting their targets within the time limit. The second string was even better, with tighter shot groups and faster transitions. By the final string, Sarah had found a rhythm that combined speed with precision, finishing with one of the day's top scores. Marcus Johnson maintained his lead after the rapid-fire event, but Sarah had moved into second place overall, ahead of several former state champions. The gap between first and second place was narrow enough that the final day's practical shooting course would determine the championship. The practical course was the most complex challenge in competitive shooting, requiring competitors to engage multiple targets from various positions while navigating through a course that simulated real-world shooting scenarios. Sarah had improved dramatically in this discipline over the past 5 weeks, but it remained the area where her relative inexperience showed most clearly. Frank spent the evening walking through the course with Sarah, discussing strategy for each position and identifying potential challenges. They practiced her movement patterns in a hotel conference room, with Frank playing the role of targets and obstacles. Remember, this isn't about being the fastest, Frank emphasized. Smooth is fast. Focus on clean execution and let your natural speed develop. Don't try to match the pace of competitors who have been running courses like this for years. The final day dawned with light rain, adding an extra challenge to the outdoor practical course. Conditions were the same for everyone, but the slippery surfaces and reduced visibility would test each competitor's adaptability and mental toughness. Sarah was scheduled to run the course in the afternoon, giving her time to watch other competitors and adjust her strategy based on their performances. She observed carefully as seasoned competitors navigated the challenges, noting which approaches worked best and where mistakes commonly occurred. When her turn came, Sarah approached the starting line with calm confidence. Frank was positioned where she could see him throughout most of the course, ready to provide coaching signals if needed. The range officer gave the start signal, and Sarah began moving through the course with deliberate precision. Her shooting was accurate and consistent, with clean hits on every target. Her movement between positions was smooth, but not rushed, avoiding the stumbles and balance issues that had affected several earlier competitors on the wet surfaces. As she engaged the final targets, Sarah could hear increased excitement from the spectator gallery. When she completed the course and the final scores were calculated, the results sent shockwaves through the competitive shooting world. Sarah had won the practical shooting stage outright, posting a score that was better than any other competitor, including Marcus Johnson. With one stage remaining and Sarah trailing by just 2 points overall, the state championship had become a two-person race between the defending champion and the newcomer who had been shooting competitively for less than 6 months. The final stage was a combined precision and speed challenge that would determine not just the state champion, but potentially change the landscape of competitive shooting forever. As Sarah prepared for the most important 30 minutes of her shooting career, she realized that the quiet girl who had walked into the Riverside Shooting Club was about to attempt something that no one thought was possible. The final stage of the state championship drew the largest crowd in the tournament's history. Word had spread through the shooting community about the remarkable newcomer who was challenging the 4-time defending champion in what had become the closest competition in decades. Spectators filled every available seat in the gallery, and many stood along the permitted areas behind the firing line. Sarah sat quietly in the preparation area, reviewing her mental checklist one final time. The combined precision and speed stage would require her to demonstrate mastery of every skill she had developed over the past 6 months. 20 precision shots at varying distances, followed by a rapid engagement sequence that demanded perfect accuracy under extreme time pressure. Frank knelt beside her chair, speaking in the calm, measured tone that had guided her training from the beginning. "This is what we've prepared for," he said quietly. "Everything you've learned, every hour you've practiced, every adjustment we've made, it all comes down to the next 30 minutes. But remember, you're not shooting for anyone else. Shoot your game, execute your technique, and let the results take care of themselves." Marcus Johnson was scheduled to shoot immediately before Sarah, and she watched his performance with professional admiration. The defending champion showed no signs of pressure, methodically working through the precision stage with a mechanical consistency that had made him nearly unbeatable. His rapid-fire sequence was flawless, each shot finding its mark despite the demanding time constraints. When Marcus completed his string and his score was posted, a murmur went through the crowd. He had shot exceptionally well, setting a new stage record that would require near-perfect performance to match. The 2-point gap that Sarah needed to overcome had grown to 7 points, meaning she would need to shoot better than she ever had before. As Sarah's name was called to the firing line, the crowd fell silent. She walked to her assigned position with steady steps, her equipment bag held securely in both hands. The familiar routine of setting up her shooting station provided comfort and focus, each action performed exactly as she had practiced thousands of times. Dr. Walsh's mental training techniques came into play as Sarah began her pre-competition routine. She visualized each shot hitting the center of the target, her breathing controlled and her movements smooth. The pressure of the moment faded away, replaced by the focused concentration that had become her trademark. The precision stage began with targets at 25 yards. Sarah's first shot was a perfect 10, hitting the center ring with authority. The crowd responded with appreciative applause, but Sarah was already focused on her second shot. Her rhythm was immediate and confident, each shot executed with the mathematical precision that Frank had helped her develop. As the distances increased to 50 yards, then 75 yards, Sarah's performance remained flawless. Her groupings were incredibly tight, with shot after shot finding the center rings. Spectators who had come to see an interesting competition were witnessing something extraordinary, a level of precision shooting that was rare even among the sport's elite performers. Elena Rodriguez, watching from the competitor area, turned to David Park with amazement. "I've never seen shooting like this from anyone," she whispered. "She's not just competing at this level, she's elevating it." By the 15th precision shot, Sarah had matched Marcus Johnson's stage record. The crowd was completely silent now, understanding they were watching something historic unfold. Frank stood motionless in the coaching area, his expression calm, but his hands clenched with tension. Sarah's final 5 precision shots were perfect 10s, each one hitting the center ring with authority. When the precision stage concluded, she had not only matched Marcus's record, she had broken it by 3 points. The gap she needed to overcome in the rapid-fire sequence had been cut to 4 points. The rapid-fire stage would determine the championship. Sarah had to engage 6 targets in 12 seconds, with each target requiring at least 1 hit to score. Missing any target would cost her the title, while perfect accuracy would make her the youngest state champion in the sport's history. Sarah took her position for the rapid-fire sequence, her competition pistol-loaded and ready. The electronic timing system showed green, indicating the range was clear and safe. The range officer raised his hand to begin the countdown that would start the most important 12 seconds of Sarah's life. "Shooter ready," the range officer called. Sarah nodded, her breathing controlled and her stance perfect. "Stand by." The starting signal seemed to echo forever, but Sarah was already moving. Her first target appeared at 7 yards, and her shot broke instantly. Clean hit, center mass. The second target was angled to the right, requiring a quick transition and a more challenging shot placement. Another clean hit. The third and fourth targets came up simultaneously, testing Sarah's ability to prioritize and engage multiple threats rapidly. She chose the closer target first, scored the hit, and transitioned smoothly to the second. Both shots found their marks with room to spare. Target 5 was the most challenging, a small silhouette at 15 yards that required precise shot placement to score. Sarah's engineering background helped her calculate the lead time and sight picture automatically, and her shot hit exactly where she intended. The final target was pure pressure. With 10 seconds elapsed and 1 target remaining, Sarah had 2 seconds to find, aim, and engage her last shot. Missing would cost her the championship, while a hit would complete the most remarkable rise in competitive shooting history. Sarah found her target confirmed her sight alignment, and pressed the trigger with the same smooth control she had practiced countless times. The shot broke clean, and the target registered a perfect hit just as the time limit expired. The crowd erupted. Frank was jumping up and down in the coaching area, his usual composure completely abandoned. Competitors who had been rivals just moments before surrounded Sarah with congratulations and applause. Elena Rodriguez was crying, overwhelmed by witnessing such an extraordinary performance. When the final scores were calculated and verified, Sarah Martinez had won the state championship by 2 points, the smallest margin of victory in the tournament's history. More importantly, her combined score across all stages set a new overall record that exceeded the previous mark by 8 points. The trophy presentation was unlike anything the tournament had ever seen. Sarah stood on the top step of the podium, still processing what had happened, while Marcus Johnson applauded from the second position with genuine respect and admiration. The crowd's standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. In her brief acceptance speech, Sarah thanked Frank for his coaching and belief in her abilities, her parents for their support, and the shooting community for welcoming her into their sport. But she also acknowledged that this was just the beginning of her competitive career. 6 months ago, I had never held a firearm, Sarah said into the microphone. Today, I'm the state champion. But this sport isn't just about individual achievement. It's about pushing the boundaries of what's possible and inspiring others to pursue excellence. I hope my story shows young people, especially young women, that with dedication and proper coaching, extraordinary things can be accomplished. The impact of Sarah's victory extended far beyond the shooting range. News of her achievements spread through social media and traditional news outlets, inspiring countless young women to try competitive shooting. Enrollment at shooting clubs across the state increased dramatically, with many new participants specifically citing Sarah's example as their motivation. Frank's coaching career was transformed overnight. Requests for instruction poured in from around the country, and he was invited to speak at coaching seminars and training camps. But he remained focused on continuing Sarah's development, knowing that her natural talent and work ethic could take her to national and international levels. The Riverside Shooting Club, once a quiet refuge for recreational shooters, became a destination for serious competitors seeking to understand the training methods that had produced a state champion. The walls that had once displayed only male champions now prominently featured Sarah's victory photo and the target from her record-setting performance. 3 weeks after the state championship, Sarah received an invitation that would change her life again. The U.S. national shooting team wanted her to attend a selection camp for international competition. The girl who had walked into a shooting club out of curiosity had caught the attention of Olympic-level coaches. As Sarah prepared for the next phase of her competitive journey, she reflected on the extraordinary path that had brought her to this point. The doubts and skepticism she had faced had been replaced by respect and admiration from the shooting community. The barriers that had seemed insurmountable just months earlier had been broken through dedication, excellent coaching, and an unwavering belief in her own potential. Frank often reminded her that talent without effort was meaningless, but effort without talent had limitations too. Sarah possessed both in remarkable quantities, combined with the analytical mindset that allowed her to approach shooting as both an art and a science. The marksmen who had once relaxed their aim when watching her practice now studied her technique carefully, hoping to learn from a young woman who had redefined what was possible in competitive shooting. Sarah Martinez had not just broken barriers. She had demolished them completely, proving that excellence could come from the most unexpected places and inspiring a new generation of shooters to pursue their own extraordinary goals. Her story became legendary within the shooting community, but Sarah herself remained focused on the future. The state championship was an incredible achievement, but she knew it was only the first step toward even greater goals. With Frank's continued coaching and her own relentless dedication to improvement, Sarah was ready to take her talents to the national and international stage, where the best shooters in the world would discover what the marksmen at the Riverside Shooting Club had learned. Never underestimate the quiet determination of someone with nothing to lose and everything to prove.